I want to make sure everybody got the answer to that last one on page 3. We were just racing the bell as the video went off. So we had x squared plus 7 squared equals 25 squared. And remember, the 25 is the one that has to be alone on the other side because it's opposite the right angle. Then we wrote x squared plus 49 equals 625, which is 25 squared. I subtracted 49 from both sides and got x squared equals 576. But I need to know what x is, not x squared. So to undo the x squared, I do the opposite, which is square root. But if I square root the left side, I also need to square root the right side. So the square root of x squared, the 2's cancel, I get x. Square root of 576 is 24. And then we look at the units, feet. So let's go ahead and go over to page 4. Okay, now that you've seen a couple worked out, the example problem in number 10, why don't you go ahead and shut off the video and try these next two. Do notice this one does say round, so that means the answer is probably going to go on forever in your calculator, so make note of that. So go ahead and set up, solve, and make sure you label your answers and then come back and check them with me. Okay, on a sunny day, a building and its shadow form the sides of a right triangle. So we can assume that this is the right angle. The hypotenuse is 37 meters long. The shadow, which is what's on the sidewalk, is 21 meters long. How tall is the building? So we'll put our X there. Round to the nearest tenth. So that's important. That's probably a highlighter moment to remind yourself that you are allowed to round on this one. So then we have, first we have to find our C. So this is C, always the side opposite the right angle, and it's the one that has to be alone. So this can be A and this can be B, or this can be A and this can be B. That has to be C. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared would be, I'll go ahead and make this A squared plus B squared equals C squared 37 squared. So on our calculator, we can do 21 and hit the X squared button. And that tells us it's 441. So X squared plus 441 equals 37. Then hit your X squared button, and that's 1369. Then we want to subtract 441 from both sides because we're trying to find the height of the building, which is X. So minus 441. So we get X squared equals, so 1369 is still in our calculator. So then we can just do minus 441, and that gives us 928. And so let's go ahead and bring it over here. So then we have, whoops. So let's go ahead and bring it up here. So X squared equals 928. And remember, we don't want to know what X squared is. We want to know what X is, the height of the building. So that means we need to undo X squared by doing the opposite. The opposite of square is square rooting, and then these just cancel each other. So then we get X equals, and this is when we go into the calculator. So second square root 928, close our parenthesis, and we get 30.46. Let's go ahead and write the whole thing first, not the whole thing, but Okay, and now it says nearest tenth, so we look at our tenths place, which is 4. 4 followed by a 6 says turn it into 5. And remember, the minute we round, we show the reader it's a rounded answer by putting the approximate symbol. So it's approximately 30.5, and then we see meters. So that's how tall the building is. So if they asked you to write a sentence about that, you would say the building is approximately 30.5 meters tall. Okay, I hope everybody got that one right. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. This is the one I had students highlight as closest to the test. I think this is like number 7 on the test, something like that. So, on a sunny day, a tree and its shadow form the sides of a right triangle. So there we go. So the tree, the shadow. The hypotenuse is 50 meters long, and the tree is 40 meters tall. How long is the shadow? X. So then we need to figure out what C is. So C is 50. It doesn't matter whether we call this A and this B or this A and this B, but C has to be 50. It's always the longest side, and it's always the side opposite the right angle. So I'm going to do A squared plus B squared equals C squared. I'll call this one A. I like having my X first. X squared plus 40 squared equals 50 squared. So 4 times 4 is 16, and 2 zeros would be 1600. 5 times 5 is 25, and 2 zeros would be 2500. Subtract 1600, subtract 1600. And it's looking like x squared equals 900. And then we have to square root both sides in order to find out what x is, because remember, we don't want to know x squared, we want to know x. So square root both sides, and the square root and the square undo each other, so we get x equals, and when you type that in your calculator, you get 30. So second square root, 900. Woo! 911. Close. There it is. 30. So 30 what? And this would be meters again. So if they ask for a full sentence on this one, you would say the tree's shadow is 30 meters long. So those are pretty nice and easy, right? Probably remember them from high school geometry or previous math classes. You pretty much see Pythagorean theorem in every class in some shape or form. And we will see it again for sure in this class. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about radical functions. So a radical function is, instead of having y equals, we just replace it with f of x is the nth root of x. So n has to be greater than 1. We can't take the first root. And it has to be an integer, which means it can't be a fraction or a decimal. It's a whole number, positive or negative. So that's what integers are. 0, plus 1, minus 1, plus 2, minus 2. Those are integers. So no fractions, no decimals, but it could be negatives. And that's called a radical function. So to evaluate, you do it just like you would any other function we've done. When they ask us to find evaluate for x equals 6, everywhere we see an x, we replace it with 6. So f of 6 is 3 times 6 plus 7. 18 plus 7 is 25. Square root of 25 is 5. And then you write your final answer as f of 6. Square root of 25 is 5. And remember why we do this, because it gives us our first point on the graph. So we know the point, and it didn't ask for this, but the reason we use function notation, so we know the first point on the graph, or one of the points on the graph, is 6, 5. Okay, so let's do the first one, and then you can do the second one. So this says x is 7. So f of 7, so I see an x here and I see an x here. So everywhere you see an x, you plug in 7. So I put a 7 there, and then I'm going to go 5 times 7 plus 1. 35 plus 1 is 36. So f of 7 equals square root of 36, which is 6. For my final answer, I write f of 7 equals 6. And like I said, that gives us our first point. And you can see on the next page, we are going to be graphing. So we want to know what the points are that are on the graph. So this one would be the point 7, 6. So not the answer. It's not what they asked for, but you should know when you write this that means this point is on the graph. Okay, go ahead and shut off the video and try 14 on your own. So g of 4 equals 3 times 4 squared plus 16. So 48 and 16. Let's go ahead and 64, but I just want to show you how to do it on the calculator as well. So second, oh, no, we don't want the square root sign. So let's just do 3 times 4, hit your x squared button, plus 16, so 64. So g of 4 is the square root of 64, which is 8. So I write my answer, g of 4 equals 8. That's what they want, because they just say evaluate. But remember, that means the point 48 is on the graph. So on the next page, like I said, we are going to be graphing, so you need to understand that that gives you a point once you have evaluated. Okay, so easy enough, right? So next we're going to learn about domain. Domain is on our test, and it's also on our final exam. So to determine the domain, if it's even, do you remember that what's under the radical has to be positive or 0? So we call that non-negative. So the radicand has to be non-negative. So that means A is the radicand, right? Has to be greater than or equal to 0. That's what non-negative means. Equal to 0 is not negative, greater than 0 is not negative. And that's actually going to be the inequality that we solve. We're going to take whatever's under the radical and make it greater than or equal to 0, because we learned with even indices, you cannot have a negative. Remember how we wrote non-real number on the first page? With an odd index, the domain is all real numbers. So when we have cube root of A, we say the domain is negative infinity to positive infinity. So odd index, we can put anything we want, because remember how we said cube root of negative 27 was negative 3? So you can have a negative under an odd index. You can't have a negative under an even index. So remember when we wrote square root of negative 4 is non-real number. Because I want you to understand, I don't want you just to memorize stuff. I want you to understand. So when the index is even, I cannot find that answer. If you do it on your calculator, it will say error. So that means whatever's under the radical must be equal to 0 or greater than 0. But with an odd index, we can put any number we want: positive, negative, 0, fraction, decimal. So this is how we find the domain on the next page.